All right. Thank you again for joining JMT Consulting for our expert speaker series. My name is Melissa Waters, and I'm the manager of the events and programs at JMT. We're happy to have Peter Heller, founder of Heller Fundraising Group, talking about your capital campaign, Are You Ready? This webinar is sponsored by JMT Consulting. We are an ERP and financial management solutions firm with 28 years experience that specializes in nonprofits. We work with a wide variety of software partners to find the best solution for your nonprofit. I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes, and then I'm going to turn it over to Peter. If you have any questions during the webinar, please submit your questions in the portion on your control panel labeled questions. We will pause to answer questions halfway through and then again at the end of the webinar. You will also receive a survey at the end of the webinar to tell us how we did today. Finally, today's webinar recording and slides will be emailed to you as well. I'd like to introduce Peter. After a 15-year career working at 5 universities on a handful of huge capital campaigns, he left his day job at Columbia University in New York City. That was 15 years ago, and that was when he founded the Heller Fundraising Group. Located in New York City, his company, which now has 6 staff members and a team of additional collaborating consultants, provides consulting and training services to nonprofits focusing on capital campaigns, feasibility studies, and building major gift programs. Peter has personally trained scores of nonprofit professionals in capital campaign and major gift fundraising, and has recently conducted training programs for Amnesty International USA, the New Israel Fund, AFP, the Foundation Center, and others. And with that, I will turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Melissa. And hello, everybody. Today, we're going to do, as Melissa said, I'm going to click the right button on my computer. We are going to do your capital campaign. Are you ready? I have a lot of really useful, practical materials and concepts to help you get through this hour. And I think if you stick with us through the whole hour, you're going to really be excited at the end of it with some extremely useful information and tools that you can take back to your office or to your colleagues and work on the next steps on a big fundraising effort, particularly a capital campaign. So I'm going to start, as Melissa said, we have about 2:30. I'm going to pause for some questions, and then we'll pause at the end right before 3 o'clock for questions as well, so we get you finished at 3 or wherever you are today, an hour from now. So let's start with some initial concepts. I'm going to, actually, before I do that, I'm going to do just a few slides for you on my company and myself, so you have a little bit more context for us and what we do. And so we have a tagline at the Heller Fundraising Group. It's your aspirations funded. Because really the paradox of fundraising in a capital campaign is that if you focus solely on the money, you're going to raise some, but you're not going to raise really as much as you can. So we like to help nonprofits focus on their aspirations. This is a smattering of the nonprofits that we've worked with over the years. You can find the full list on our website. A lot of these are local New York City area nonprofits, but some of them, like Amnesty International, are well known throughout the world. This is our team currently. 6 of the people here, including the 3 of us on the top row and the 3 women on the top left, are all staff members, and everybody else is a collaborating consultant. Melissa mentioned that I worked at a number of universities. I worked at Columbia, American Friends of Tel Aviv University, a couple of University of California campuses, and my alma mater, College of the Atlantic. A little more pertinent to all of you, what do? We run feasibility studies, which is the work that leads up to a capital campaign. We run capital campaigns, major gift programs, which is helping to connect with your largest individual donors when you're not in a campaign mode. And just like today, we're doing training and coaching on these subjects. A lot of you will be interested to find out that we have a suite of free tools in a Excel spreadsheet you can download from our website. On the homepage, you'll find this green box that says free tools, and you can go in and download it. It's a sort of starter kit for some of the things that we're working on today. So here we are. Your capital campaign, are you ready? I want to talk first about what a capital campaign actually is. And in a few slides earlier, I said that before, in addition to doing capital campaigns, we do feasibility studies. And as a lot of you already know, that's a particular thing that happens before a capital campaign. Not all the time, but we like to think it's a best practice that happens a lot of the time. We do those before campaigns, and we'll talk about that later. I've actually put it at the very end of the presentation because I want you to have the concepts first before we look at what a feasibility study is. So if we look at this one slide in front of us here, it's a pile of money going into a bank. If you want to crystallize what a capital campaign is all about, this is it. Now, a little bit later, I'm going to talk about how it's actually not really about this. It's about that your aspirations funded. It's about big ideas and that sort of stuff. But the reason that I put this slide first is that those inside of a nonprofit who are going to be running the campaign have to be really clear that this is your focus and this is your goal, because there have to be some people who are focused on getting that money into the bank account. So what's a campaign? I'm going to start the first few slides. I'm going to read a few things and then we'll get a little bit more creative going forward. I'm going to read this definition that I came up with. A capital campaign is a focused effort to raise money above and beyond regular operating expenses. It usually happens over a period of years, and when done effectively, can galvanize attention on the future of the community. Now, we're going to talk a little bit later when we talk about a case for support. I didn't say the future of the organization because a lot of ways you have to get yourselves out of the way to focus on your community. And by the way, it's never about the new building. It's about what can happen because you're going to have a new building. So here are some bad reasons for a campaign. I like to start with this so we can always go up from here. First, you're having an organizational anniversary. Anniversaries are fabulous, but in and of themselves, not a sufficient enough reason to have a capital campaign. The idea of owning a building, it has to really fit into your strategic plan as an organization. It's not a good idea just to think that, well, we'd like to own this building. A board member suggests it. Board members are amazing advocates for your organization, and you have to be careful about just riding with something and going with it just because somebody on your board or another important influencer thinks it's a good idea. I'm going to leave off that one about nothing to do this weekend. The majority of our time today is going to be focused on what I call the 6 elements of a successful campaign. And they're all right here in front of you. We've got the dollar goal, the case for support, prospects, campaign committee, systems and staffing, and timing. And over the years that we've worked on capital campaigns, we've observed that these are really the main things that you have to have in shape and understand in order to have an effective campaign. And you'll see later that we work on some of these, actually the majority of them, during a feasibility study to test how prepared you are to then do the campaign. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each of these one by one. And as I said, when we get to the end of prospects, we'll stop for some questions. So element number 1 is the dollar goal. What do I actually mean by that? So you can say, we want to have a capital campaign. We've got some programmatic needs, and we really need to renovate the first floor of our school building or whatever it is. And I think we can raise $2 million. So that's not really a dollar goal. A dollar goal is a specific amount that has line items and allows you to say that your campaign is going to be for X amount of dollars. And I'm going to go into some of the details here and show some examples, both good and bad. So here's things to include in your dollar goal. If you're doing a building project, all the building project costs, architect, construction, furnishings, painting, soft costs, the cost of maintaining that newer, bigger building over time. People often forget about that. Program funding, you can put that in your campaign. A lot of people like to put endowment funding in a campaign. We often test that as part of a feasibility study and find out that it's possibly of interest to donors, but maybe not as much as other things. And of course, the cost of running this campaign, whether it's for consulting services such as our firm or for adding staff, and events, mailings, printing, all sorts of things. So I wanted to run through now a few budgets for the dollar goal that I consider a good budget for presenting to donors. Now, so this is, I like to make things as simple as possible at all times. Now that doesn't mean that the world, including fundraising, doesn't sometimes need complexity, but as much as possible, you want to make things simple. To me, this is a beautiful and simple dollar goal. It's got literally 3 line items. This was a campaign we worked on. I think it ended about 4 years ago. Actually ended up over goal a little bit. I think $6.6 million, which we were very happy about. And this was there was no physical plant. It was the current initiatives for the work that this organization did advocating for children, new initiatives. So that's basically current programs, future programs, and then endowment and planned gifts. Very simple. Okay, what if now you have a project that involves primarily physical plant? Here's another example. This is a synagogue that was, we just completed this campaign actually about 3 months ago. And this, again, this is $16 million. That's not a small amount of money, but this is a 5-line item budget. And you can see that each line has something to do with physical space, and it's been calibrated based on working with the architects to get their estimated fees for all the different things that would be involved in building these spaces. And then the expenses involved in running the campaign were fed in, divided among all of these and fed in. So it's not a separate line item, although you can always do that. And this, again, if you were to look at the information that backs up this budget, there's a lot of detail from the architects and other planning people. But this is what I consider really appropriate to explain top line, to explain a campaign to your donor audience, and in fact to your staff and board. People certainly deserve more detail when they want it. So here is an example of both what not to do and what that may have, something like that budget might have come from. Now, purposefully, this is hard to read. This is a, I can't even see it, but I think we'll see the same thing on the next page. I think it's like a $60 million overall budget. This is really detailed. There's a lot of stuff in here. When you get the slides, you can blow it up and look at it yourself. But this is not what you want to present in a dollar goal for a campaign. This is a summarized version of the same thing, actually, summarized version of the same thing, and then. However, here is what we did to make that same thing kind of palatable to a donor audience. And you actually, I would cross off everything below the word total in the middle. You can see that we took that very complex budget and turned it into this, and then went and rolled it out and used it in the campaign. Not a small amount of money, $60 million. So the last thing in the dollar goal, and this is a very, very important tool that we use all the time in campaigns, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. It's called the gift table. And the way that we work is that first, you need to be clear on your dollar goal. Like I said a few minutes ago, it can't be maybe $2 million, maybe this much money. It has to be a concrete amount of money. Once we have that amount of money, we divide it usually into these three levels: leadership gifts, major gifts, and community gifts. And then we parse out how many of each we're aiming for to come up with, in this case, a $5 million goal. I'm going to get into more of the prospect column in the middle a little later in the discussion, but for now, the point is that you take your dollar goal and then you parse it out in terms of gift levels, so you see at least in an ideal world, the level of gift and how many at each level you're going to need to reach your goal. Okay, that's really, that's it for the dollar goal. Really, really important thing. Surprisingly, at least to me, I'd say I've never started a project with one of our nonprofit clients where they have the dollar goal all figured out before we get working with them. There's a lot of little details that need to be fine-tuned. Even if they're already working with an architect or they've figured out the programs that they're going to be growing, etc. There's some details that need to be worked out. So element number 2 is the case for support. It's frankly probably the most exciting element of all of them to me, not only because in a few minutes there's going to be a picture from the Black Panther movie, but because this is really where you get to go beyond that dollars into the bank account image. This is where you get to really figure out what your vision for the future of your community is, going back to what I was saying at the beginning about the definition of a campaign, where a campaign is about making things better for your community. So, case for support. Here are the parts of the case. And, you know, we've worked on cases for years and years. I have particular views on them. I certainly don't rule the world when it comes to cases, but I'm going to share my views, and you know, you're welcome to approach it your own way. We found that this works super well. The most important thing, and the thing that I find hardest for almost all communities and almost all nonprofit leaders, is that the case needs to be about your vision, or the organization's vision, for an even better and stronger future for your community. And what I mean by that is that if you can't, first of all, picture that vision, and then be really clear that the project you have in mind, whether it's physical plant or programs or endowment or a combination of all those, you have to be really clear that that project is going to make this vision stronger in the future. So for instance, if you want to build a new school building because your current building is falling apart, or you want to serve more students, or there's some other issue, you have to be really clear that it's not simply, geez, we got to move, this building's falling apart, but how are you going to be able to serve the students and the families and the community you're in better because of having that building? The building is really just a piece in the puzzle of getting to that better future. And that I'd say is the most important part of the case, and the piece that people often leave out. We're working with a social justice organization right now where every paragraph of the case, before we kind of help them dive into it, was, you know, started with the name of their organization and what they had done, and what they were going to do for the organization better as a result of this campaign. That's not inspiring. After you've figured out your vision for the future, you want to address the problem that is being faced either basically in your community. You know, not enough kids are getting educated in the type of education we provide, and therefore, when we have this bigger building, we'll be able to do that better. However, I generally like to have the vision for the future and the problem, and you'll see what I mean in just a couple minutes because I'm going to show you a few examples. I generally like to have those free from even mentioning the name of your nonprofit. If I'm working with you, my ideal world is that you paint a picture for the future that's not, we're going to do this for that, we're going to do this, but it's like, this is what our community is going to have to be healthier, smarter, safer, more educated, blah, 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 any of those things. However, there's a problem in our ability, to do that because of X, Y, and Z. There's not enough kids getting a high level of education. There's not enough schools for them. There's whatever the problem is. Then, and only then, does your nonprofit step in to provide the solution. We've identified a space in, downtown where we'll be able to build a new school building that serves more children in this area and will therefore make our community stronger. And after that, you want to fill in, you want to absolutely put that dollar goal, the campaign budget, and you want to explain what each of those, your campaign, if I put that in quotes, your campaign is going to be the various things that the line items do. That's the nuts and bolts of it. So it's going to be, this much for programs, this much for building, this much for endowment, and the reasons each of those are important towards your vision. And then you want to fill in with some of your past accomplishments, your history, and data and that sort of stuff. And the campaign budget can either be up above, or it can be where I've put it here. And then generally it's nice to say, please join us in this campaign. We're counting on our community or something like that. So let's go on from here. And there's a few other things about cases that's really important. And then I want to show you some examples, as I said. So your campaign name matters. I've been working right now with an organization in Connecticut, and we've been having this this debate back and forth on what is the name of the campaign. So they've come up with Building Community, because they're doing, they're going to be renovating their building, and they have, they're a community, and this is going to, the campaign will build community. It's a great name. It's probably the name of every fifth campaign in the world. So I'm not super crazy about it. It doesn't have anything that says anything particular about their organization, their future, anything like that. So it's a fine name. They've already raised, I think, $3 million. So I'm not worried about them. But and that's before the campaign started. But also, it's not the most inspiring to me. The other thing, here's my Black Panther that I promised you. So who is the hero of your case? And this goes back to what I was saying in terms of the definition of a capital campaign. The mistake, in my view, that many nonprofits make when they're writing their case, and then when they're pitching their capital campaign or even their regular fundraising to their donors, is that they make themselves the hero of the case. And to me, that is not as exciting or as interesting as making, and not as correct as making the community you serve the hero of your case. Meaning that if you're a school, the children and families and their education is the hero of your story. If you're an environmental organization, it's a safer and healthier neighborhood or world, and such like that. So it's really figuring that out. And then a lot of the time, your donors will be able to read this case and they'll see themselves in it, or see that their money is going to help those heroes or those community members rather than you, which is really, at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. So here are a few examples. This is a science center in Ithaca, New York, and you'll see here, imagine a world where every young person is empowered to use science in shaping a better future. You can barely even see the name of the organization on the cover of their case for support. It's not saying, hey, we're the Science Center, fund us. Okay, and then you open the first fold-out pages and you see information on the founders, and then you see information on overall impact. It's only, it's only a page or two later, which I'm only including the first couple pages on each of these examples. It's only a page or two later where you actually learn about the project at hand, because first you're getting inspired in that vision for what's possible. Here's one we did a number of years ago with a really wonderful cultural arts organization in New York City called the Irish Arts Center. You'll see on this picture is a building that is actually being built today, and the campaign name. This is an example of an amazing campaign name, where almost home. It has a couple meanings. I'm not going to go into the whole thing now because we've got a lot of work to do, but I love that name. And then once you've opened, clearly the building they're going to build is boom, it's right here. But when you open this document, you get a quote from Gabriel Byrne, famous actor, about things Irish. It doesn't say anything, barely. You can't find the name of the organization on these first two pages. Then you get something about Ireland and the feeling of being in Ireland. It's only after you've turned another page that you start to learn about the Irish Arts Center and what they intend to do to become a stronger organization. This is a synagogue in Falls Church, Virginia. It's the one we had that $16 million budget for. It's a home for the future of Judaism. This is their cover of their case. This is the inside, some inspiring, these are images that would make sense to the people in the community. Inspiring images, and I can't remember if I have, yeah, so then you get to the future of Judaism is right here. This isn't even talking about what the campaign's going to do yet. That frankly comes, I think, 2 or 3 pages later. This is inspiration. And here, I think this is our final example. Then I'm going to show you an example I consider pretty bad. Here's a children's center. Our children, our future. Little girl looking out. This is the view she would see from the new building. This is their vision. This is, more inspiring stuff. And then eventually you get to, again, here's our children, our future. The problem and things, when you flip the next page, you start to learn about what they're specifically going to intend to do. Here's an example that I was just appalled at when I saw. I took the name of the organization out because of how shocked I was. This is a, I did not do this case, thankfully, but this is a prep school that is, obviously, they're having a centennial campaign. If we were all together in a in-person training, I would ask you all what you think the problems with this are. But so here's the cover. Here's a table of contents. Goes on 16 pages. And here's the introduction. I love this so much, I'm just going to read it to you. There are moments in an institution's history that define its very existence. These are moments when challenges are turned into opportunities. I can't even read the rest. It's so bad. I promise you this was a canned thing from the consulting firm that just crossed out somebody's name and put it here. I don't know if there's another page. No, there's not. So the next page actually has, this page. I love this page. And I love this page because this is a school. There's not a single kid or even a person in this picture. Here, you got 2 kids, you got their backs. Please don't do this. That's my plea to you. The last thing I'll say about cases for now, and then we'll look at prospects and then take some questions, is that these examples I'm showing you, these are what happen usually when you're clear, you're ready for the campaign. When you're doing a feasibility study or testing, you want to do a case that's in a draft format, that's something can be very nicely formatted, but it's printed out from your computer and shared with people in a less formal setting. This what we've been looking at is several months down the line after you've been getting everything organized. Okay, so element number 3, prospects. Obviously, you could not run a campaign without donors or prospects. The reason that this is element number 3 is your dollar goal and your case have to be really clear in your heads way before you start talking to prospects. So there's a lot, I mean, we could spend a whole hour chatting about what's important to do to understand your prospect base, but let's look at just a few things. You need to make sure that you have enough prospects to run a campaign, and you need to know how you evaluate whether they actually are prospects for your campaign. And you do that through things such as wealth screening, what we call rating sessions, which is wealth screening is usually done through proprietary databases like Donor Search, where we have a subscription to that. There's also Wealth Engine and iWave and several others. And that gives you a sense of people's capacity to give, as well as whether they've been giving philanthropically elsewhere. And rating sessions are less formal. It's kind of sitting around a table with a group of your board members or other people and looking at a list. And also, obviously, data on who has already been giving to you is quite important. We like to use what we call natural networks to get more prospects, where you brainstorm on, okay, where, if we're a school, going back to that example again, we've got, we possibly have alumni, we have parents, we have local community members. We have maybe, depending on the type of education we provide, maybe there's people who are really interested, particularly in the specific work we're doing. So the other thing that's really important about prospects, remember I said we'd look again at that middle prospect column on the gift table, is that once you've got your dollar goal, you know how much you need to raise, you've divided it at least, in theory as a starting place in terms of these 3 main levels, and you've got a target for gifts, the number of gifts, which is the second from the left. Do I have enough prospects to reach my goal? You can basically figure that out, at least on paper. We very much advise that you do some, in the field testing, such as a feasibility study. But on paper, at least, you want to look at a multiple for the leadership and major gift categories of at least 3 times the number of gifts. So for instance, if you want 1 gift of $1 million, you need 3 prospects. We tend to make it less as you get down the table or pyramid. So in the community level, if you want 20 gifts of $10,000, we think you need 40 prospects. The very lowest level, it says many, because you're basically, if you're able to do the other stuff, you're going to have a successful campaign. Once we get going, we usually fill that in with a specific number. But for now, many is good. So this gives you a sense of, if you do this table exercise and you see for this particular $5 million campaign, they need at least 184 prospects. So just let's say 200 prospects. And if they have a donor base, if they go into their whatever system they're using to manage their donor base, and there's only 120 names, and not everybody's going to give at all these levels, you know that one of the first activities you have to do is increase your donor base. You might need to do that for 6 to 12 months before you consider launching your campaign. On the other hand, if you have 3,000 prospects, or I'd say 3,000 donors, active donors in your database, there's a good chance, depending on their capacity, that you could reach this goal. You might not get $1 million gift for this. You might have to bring that down lower into the table, but I'm much more positive when that's the case. The last thing on prospects is we use a tool. We use this in We usually use it in Google Docs, and if you download those free tools that I spoke of, and I'll show you that slide at the very end again, one of our tools is this spreadsheet we call the Top Prospect Report. This is a way, once you're getting going on your campaign, that you manage the forward momentum of the campaign. You put in your list of donors, potential donors, based on the prospect list that you've come up with, and you put all their last name, first name, other qualifying categories or qualifying data. And then really, really important, where the two arrows are, you've got a next step date and a next step. So you figure out, and we'll look at this a little bit later, what amount of outreach you can do with whoever's doing the work in a month, and you put, you don't want to put 50 people in a single month. There's almost nobody who can reach out to that many people. You want to put maybe 5 to 10 people, give or take, in a certain month, and you use those use that as a way to get through your activity rather than saying, okay, let's just go reach out to everybody. It's a really helpful tool to focus the campaign. We often call it the backbone of a campaign. So, like I said, I'm 6 minutes past when I promised, but I'm still excited to finish on time. We'll take a few questions now. If Melissa, are there questions?
We do. We have one, and this came in towards the beginning of your first little segment. It says, neither of your samples broke down the cost of the campaign. How best to present those figures to donors?
First of all, I want to say a shout out to Nick. Hi. That's a great question. So typically, campaign costs are somewhere between 5 and 10% of your goal. That's a good estimate. So say you've got a $5 million campaign. To be really, really safe and cautious, you want to say that it's going to cost you $500,000. Now let me quickly break that down. And then Melissa, I think we can take one other question and we'll move on. So you may or may not need consulting help. You may or may not need additional staff, such as somebody to administrative assistant level, or otherwise to help manage a lot of the logistics of the campaign. And you will almost definitely need somebody to design and print the case document. There'll be mailing costs. We'd like to see at least some website presence for a campaign. And most donors understand that it takes money, you have to spend money to raise money. And we felt in the example I gave earlier, we felt that $16 million, it would be better woven into each cost than as a separate line item. But it's fine to do it either way. And again, if you have a feasibility study where you present a test budget, you can see how people react to these things. It's like, oh my God, that's too much money to raise this money. I think we should just go ask 3 people and raise it all. You can get a sense of whether your community is going to be comfortable with your campaign costs. But it's often a learning process. So Melissa, and thank you, Nick. One other question.
We don't have another question, except for somebody did ask if they can get a copy of the presentation. And just a reminder, we are recording today's session. So after the webinar is concluded, we'll send out a copy of the slides and the recording. And then Gary said, outstanding presentation.
Okay, well, we always like hearing that. So thank you, Melissa. And we'll continue now with the other 3 elements and a little discussion of feasibility studies. Okay, so element number 4 is your campaign committee. Now, I often start working with nonprofits where myself and 1 or 2 of my colleagues will meet with the executive director, and if there's a development person, that person and maybe even a board member. So there's maybe somewhere between 4 to 6 of us sitting around in a room. And I often tell them that, you know, the 4 of us could really plan this entire campaign out in the next hour or 2. And we can look at your data, we'll figure out how much you can raise. However, we're just not going to be as successful or as correct if we were to involve more people. And that's the first reason to engage a campaign committee in your work. We'll see the same thing is true when you do a feasibility study. It's like you can guess at what your community thinks about your proposed plan and your proposed case, but unless you go talk to people, you're not really going to find out, you know, really in detail what they think. So we always advise that an organization have a campaign committee, and we usually actually offer a job description so that they have some sense of what those people might do. And it usually goes like this. So you want, and this is just Peter Heller's view of a campaign committee that happens to work pretty well. You want 2 co-chairs so that all the burden of figuring out this stuff and probably giving one of the larger gifts and maybe asking other people for gifts is not on one person. But it also, if you pick 2 people, sometimes even 3, it allows you to pick from different segments of your community. Maybe somebody who's younger and has been a newer member of your community, somebody who's been, you know, involved for decades. It's a nice match. Also, different ethnicities, different genders, all that sort of stuff. We like to, and I should say that the you know, in terms of what is the committee, you've got people who are helping you understand what's going on. They're listening to the process. They're in a lot of cases, they're making substantial gifts, although not everybody on a committee is always able to do that. They're sometimes opening doors to donors who you could not get access to. And you know, they're generally a support for this ongoing effort. Who should be on it? We generally like to see a combination of staff leadership, board members, and then 1 or 2 sort of outsiders. Maybe there's a few people who would be really great potential donors to the campaign, and this is a great way to involve them before you go ask them for a gift. Let's go see if they'll help you think about this. It's a great way to start them out. And generally, you know, I'd say on a campaign, we usually call it a campaign steering committee. Sometimes we have a somewhat different group when you're doing a feasibility study. We call that a campaign planning committee. It's a little nuanced there, but we generally like to start this as early as possible, engaging people early on so they can help you with what you're thinking about. There's often people on the committee, if you're doing a physical plant building, who have an experience with real estate or building projects or finance. How do I manage it? There's a lot of details there, but generally we like to have a staff person who is the point person for managing the committee. We do sometimes have campaigns that are entirely run by volunteers. It gets a little dicey there, but it is possible to do. And you want to make sure that the group meets on a regular basis, but you have to figure out what regular basis is for both the speed of your campaign and the tolerance level for meetings or conference calls for your group. That's really what we've got to say there on committees. So systems and staffing, super important. You know, we can all come up with the greatest plan for raising hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars for the future of your community. But if you don't have the proper systems and staffing in place, it's going to be really hard to actually get anything done. So let's look at this for just a few minutes. Systems. So there's a lot of different things that are needed. I don't remember, I think maybe that was my only slide. Okay, that's one slide there. excuse me just a minute. If you step back for a minute and just think, okay, we're going to raise, let's use the example of the gift table I had before. We're going to raise $5 million, and we have roughly 200 prospects to get that money. Now, to make sure that we're able to meet with most of those people, we need a whole bunch of systems. We have to track the meetings that are happening. When we start to get gifts, we have to track those gifts. Often people in a campaign will make their will pledge a gift over a period of years. So if they pledge it to 3 to 5 years, you need to make sure that that's entered in your systems and it's tracked, and you know how much money you have raised for the campaign. You generally need 2 or 3 policies that guide the campaign. What gifts will we accept? What systems do we use when somebody says, I'm ready to make a gift of $100,000? How do we just say, great, send it to us whenever you want? Or better practice, perhaps, I'm just saying, is you have a legally binding gift agreement that's been vetted with an attorney, perhaps a pro bono attorney, or maybe there's somebody on your board, and that when that person says, I'm prepared to give you $100,000, you send them a draft of the gift agreement. They sign it. It says when they're going to make payments and various other things that protect both parties. You need policies around that. You need, if you're going to acknowledge donors, maybe there's going to be a donor wall. Maybe there's going to be a list of donors. How do you list the levels that people give at? Do you come up with names for levels? Do I get on the donor wall if I've given $5,000, or is it a $100,000 limit? There's a number of things to think about there. And we like to, in terms of a system, and this leads into the staffing along with the next slide, that we like to think about having weekly strategy meetings with whoever the leadership team is, and then bringing, usually we bring that campaign committee in not so frequently, although there may be 2 or 3 members who are brought in on a regular basis. So here's just one of the tools. I really like this tool. One of the tools that we created to help with, it's kind of both staffing and systems here. So it's a little complicated. I'm just going to give the sort of 30,000-foot view. This is how many meetings your organization would need to have on a monthly basis to reach a specific campaign goal in a specific amount of time. And we didn't really talk about this, but I say meetings because most campaign gifts are going to be much better raised if you're sitting down in person with the potential donor. It's just sort of a tried and true fact of fundraising, and that's a whole, we do other trainings on how to do that. That's beyond the scope of this, but for right now, just trust me that that's the case. And if we look at year 2 here, say you're up and running and you've got a few people who are able to go out and have meetings. There's 3 different levels of activity. Modest is if you can figure out how to have 4 meetings a month. Energetic, I'm calling more than that. Your organization is able to figure out how to have 8 meetings a month. And by the way, 8 is kind of our magic number. We found you can raise millions of dollars with 8 meetings a month. 13 meetings a month is a lot. It's amazing if you have that many prospects and you have staff that can do it, but you usually need a staff member whose job is pretty much nothing but that. So it's not hard to see how the more meetings you have with potential donors, the more you're going to be able to talk about the campaign, the more you're going to be able to solicit gifts, and the more you're going to get yeses. So we generally take the number of meetings, which is that annual total, divide it in half. Say half of those meetings we're going to be able to ask somebody. The reality is in a campaign you can really ask more than that, but we like to be conservative. And then half of those people are going to say yes. And again, if you get a meeting and you ask, it's usually more than half, but that's a way that we can start to calculate how much you might raise in a year with each level of activity, and the dollar goal at the end is based on, you'll see there's a asterisk at the bottom. I'm not going to go into that now, but there's different mathematical formulas that we use for this, and you can then sort of plan out, okay, it's going to take me a year, it's going to take me 2 years, how long is it going to take me to do this? So this is one of the things we work on with our nonprofit clients when we get involved in campaigns. Staffing, I'm just going to run through fairly quickly, and then we'll go to timing and your feasibility study, so we have a few minutes for questions if there are any. So you need to be honest with yourselves when it comes to staffing that, I'm sorry about that, that you can't run a campaign effectively without staff. And that means either your development director, if you have one, is going to have to spend a good amount of their time doing this. You're going to have to put together a really stellar volunteer team, or you're going to have to hire additional staff. A lot of times, you need a combination of all of those. And this is where it goes back to the question a little while ago, is where the budget, you can see that staffing is a crucial need, and you have to account for that in a budget. Sometimes consulting firms will plant people on site. That's a way to handle it as well. We do less of that. We tend to advise, but we always help people figure out their staffing. So I want to now go through timing. Speaking of timing, I'm going to do that relatively quickly so we can also look at the feasibility studies. So there's 3 things about timing that you should know for a campaign. One is the question of when you should start the campaign. The next is how long should my campaign take? And then when do I launch a public phase? So we usually figure out when you should start the campaign when we do a feasibility study. It's the simple answer, whether or not you do a feasibility study, is when you understand how these 6 campaign elements work and you're confident about them, you're then ready to start your campaign. The length of time that a campaign takes really depends on the prospect pool, how much you're planning to raise, and that metrics of how many people you can reach out to per month, because you're just going to need to do some hard work over a period of usually 18 months to 3 years. So that's really going to help you figure out how long it's going to take. And a public phase is generally when you're more visible in your community about the fact that there's a campaign. People often call it before that a silent phase or a quiet phase. In my view, it doesn't mean that it's a secret or that people don't know about it. It's just that you're not really publicizing it. If you're in, New York City like I am, and you're a big, flashy, very well-known nonprofit, that might mean an article in the New York Times. For most of us human beings, it means some PR on the web, local media, that sort of thing. Less flashy, but you're more public about it. It's not a huge deal, but and by the way, there's different arguments. 40% of the goal has been raised. 60% of the goal has been raised. It sometimes has to do with when you might break ground on a project. Just really quickly, I'm going to scan through these. You'll be able to look at them in more detail when you get the slides. These are a few, I think there's 3 or 4 of them, just sample timelines that we've used with campaign clients. You've got a start date, an end date, and the things that happen throughout the campaign. Here's one that's just from a spreadsheet: feasibility study, planning, quiet phase, public phase, follow through, and you see the things that happen all the time. Again, another one like that. And then this one is simply a similar spreadsheet, but this one's income and expense based, which is an interesting way to do it. This one is also, these are all like details, like our lead gift meetings, our major gift meetings. When are we going to start match strategies? And there's some projections of revenue over each quarter at the bottom, which I'm actually not a fan of, but we did it anyway because somebody wanted us to. And then just briefly, feasibility or planning study. There's just, I think, 2 slides here. And again, you can look at them in more detail when you get the slides. But we believe that it's not a distraction activity or, if you hire a consulting firm, which is generally what you need to do, or a waste of money, because you're really getting all of these elements figured out, and you're using it as your first opportunity to engage your highest donors. You also use the study to write a really powerful first draft of your case. Here are the things you need in order to do a feasibility study. You have to have your dollar goal figured out. You have to have a working draft of your case. And you need at least 60 prospects so that you can ask some people to be interviewed. And very much so, you need a campaign committee so you can have some people to help you think about this. And the outcomes you want to do, we usually do 30 to 50 interviews, done some with 12 to 15. You get a lot of feedback on your case. Even if you think it's amazing, you'll find out so many things you forgot to put in there. And then you get a reality check on the rest of your project. So again, if you go to hellerfundraisinggroup.com, you'll see on the homepage there's this green box where you can download our free tools. Also, if you're interested, on the top navigation bar, there's a little button that says Fun Stuff. You'll see some interesting interviews we've done there and a few other fun things. Melissa, I think that's it. Well, if there are any final questions, we'll take them, or we can wish people a great afternoon or evening.
We actually do have some questions. And again, for those that are still with us, if you have a question, there's a questions panel that you can type those to, and we'll read them out. The first question is, what if you don't have any prospects with deep pockets?
Looks like that's from Stephanie. Hello, Stephanie. Nice to see some people I know on this call. It always feels very friendly. So there's a few things that I would suggest in that situation. One is, the most obvious answer is you need to spread your campaign gift table out so it's flatter, so that you're getting more gifts of less money from more people. So if you were hoping for $1 million gift, but there's nobody, the biggest gift you can get is $100,000, which is still an amazing gift. You need 10 gifts of $100,000 instead one gift of $1 million. That's really, a lot more work in some ways. The other thing, which is, to me, kind of more exciting and fun as a strategist, is helping organizations figure out how to build the connections so that they can find the people with deep pockets. And that takes time and persistent effort. And, I say again and again is like, you only lose on this type of stuff if you give up. Meaning that if you want to reach out to so-and-so and they don't respond to your email or call, they haven't said no. You just have to keep finding potential avenues, and you'd be amazed at what happens. So that's my initial answer there. I see that it's almost 3 o'clock, so I'm happy to stay on and answer more questions, but Melissa, if you want to do your official goodbye, and I can put your slide up if you'd like.
We have just 2 more questions for now, so
okay.
If you want to go ahead and answer those, and then we can
sure.
Sign off.
Sure,
that would
happy
be
to.
Wonderful. We still have quite an audience, so thank you for staying with us. Roughly, what do you charge for a feasibility study?
Oh, it's a great question. Yeah, it really, really depends. So I'm hesitant to quote any dollar amounts on a webinar like this. We tend to try to lose as much money as possible on feasibility studies so that we can work with people and then help them do their capital campaigns. So, there's travel, there's case writing, there's a number of things involved. I think it'd be best, anybody who's interested, best to have like an offline conversation.
Perfect.
And you can probably, I haven't ever done it, but you can probably Google how much do people charge for feasibility studies.
Not a bad idea.
Is there anything else?
Yes, so Nick also asked, is this also a % of the campaign amount?
Oh, yeah, so that's a good question. So best practices as consultants, and actually it's kind of sort of seen in the field of fundraising, whether you're a staff person or a consultant, is that we don't operate on a percentage basis, meaning like it's not a commission or, you know, hey, if your campaign's $1 million, give us 5%, or, you know, and we don't generally use like success fees or you know, that sort of stuff. But it's a little tricky because you can generally estimate how much it's going to cost you to do your campaign and how much the consulting is going to cost as a percentage of the goal. Although it's not, so that's where it gets a little tricky. It's like it's a percentage of the goal, but it's not like, hey, we're charging you this percent. It's just a good estimating factor. And then when we get in there and learn about what an organization is trying to do and how much capacity they have on staff, it's easier to tell them how much we think the campaign's going to cost and what amount of that campaign cost will be our fees.
Wonderful. We have one more question that we'll take, and then we will end it. So, Peter, the last question is, do you have to know where the money is before you raise it?
That's an interesting question. Well, you have to, I mean, part of what we do is we help you figure out if where you think it is where it really is. And if you don't know where it is, we help you, or whether it's us or not, what you need to do is you have to build those connections in your community. So on one of our recent projects, the nonprofit wanted to do some vital renovations kind of right away, but they didn't have a prospect base. But they're a pretty amazing organization in their community. We said, well, we need to help you put together a strategy of reaching out to various members in your community to build an interest, and then you can start raising money. You can't just say, oh, hey, you're a big mover and shaker in our community. We don't have a relationship yet. Could I have a lead gift to my campaign? It doesn't really work like that. But by getting people engaged through perhaps a planning committee or you know, showing them a rough draft of a plan, those are great ways to start engaging people to see if they are interested, and then to start talking with them about a potential gift. So you at least have to have one person's email or phone number so that you can begin to build a network. That's my best and final answer, Melissa.
Thank you. All right, well, that will conclude our webinar today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Peter, for your time. We hope everyone enjoyed the presentation and that you will join us for future events and webinars. You can find out more about our upcoming webinars by visiting jmtconsulting.com and clicking on the Events tab. And that concludes our webinar, so have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.